Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the cliff, the cool mountain air brushing against his face. Below, the forest stretched endlessly, a sea of deep greens and earthy browns, interrupted only by the shimmer of a winding river. This was his sanctuary, far from the noise and expectations of the world. The mountains of Colorado offered a solitude he had come to depend on. His cabin, nestled deep within the woods, was a modest structure. It wasn't built for comfort but for survival. Keanu had chosen this life deliberately, seeking refuge from the chaos of his past. The scars of his time in the military ran deep, etched into his mind like shadows that refused to fade. There were nights when sleep eluded him, replaced by the haunting memories of a mission gone wrong, a mission that cost him a brother in arms and a part of his soul. Today was one of his better days. His camera hung loosely around his neck, ready to capture the wilderness in its raw, untamed beauty. He adjusted the straps of his backpack and started down the trail, his boots crunching against the gravel path. The forest was alive with sound. Birds chirped overhead, leaves rustled in the breeze, and somewhere in the distance, the faint trickle of a stream added to the symphony. As he walked deeper into the woods, something caught his attention, a faint, anguished whimper that seemed out of place. He stopped, his senses sharpening. The sound came again, weaker this time. He followed it cautiously, his heart quickening as he scanned the dense undergrowth for its source. There, caught in a tangle of roots and wire, was a dog. The animal was thin, its coat matted with dirt, and one of its hind legs was caught in a rusty trap. His dark eyes darted to Keanu, filled with a mix of fear and pain. Keanu's first instinct was to step back. Memories of violence and danger flashed through his mind, instincts honed by years of survival urging him to keep his distance. But something in the dog's gaze stopped him. It wasn't just fear, it was a plea. He crouched slowly, speaking in a soft, soothing tone. "Hey there, buddy. It's okay. I'm not going to hurt you." The dog growled weakly but didn't move, the strength clearly drained. Keanu reached into his backpack, pulling out a pair of thick gloves and a multi-tool. The trap was old but still viciously effective. He studied it carefully, noting the jagged edges that had cut into the dog's leg. "This might sting a bit," he murmured as he worked to release the mechanism. The dog flinched, letting out a pained yelp, but it didn't resist. After what felt like an eternity, the trap gave way, and Keanu gently freed the animal's leg. The dog tried to stand but collapsed almost immediately, its body trembling from exhaustion. Keanu sighed, reaching into his pack again to retrieve a water bottle. He poured a small amount into his cupped hand and held it out. The dog hesitated before lapping it up, its movements cautious but desperate. "You're tougher than you look," Keanu said with a faint smile. He wasn't sure why he was talking to the animal, but it felt natural. With the dog too weak to walk, Keanu fashioned a makeshift sling from his jacket and carefully lifted it onto his back. The journey back to the cabin was slow and grueling, but he didn't mind. There was a sense of purpose in his steps, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. By the time they reached the cabin, the sun was dipping below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and pink. Keanu laid the dog gently on an old blanket near the fireplace, his mind already racing with thoughts of how to treat its wounds. "You'll be safe here," he said softly, brushing a hand over the dog's head. The animal's eyes closed, its body finally relaxing as exhaustion overtook it. For the first time in a long while, Keanu felt a flicker of something he couldn't quite name. Hope, perhaps, or maybe it was the beginning of a bond, one that neither he nor the dog could yet understand. The next morning, Keanu Reeves awoke to the soft rustling of movement. The dog was awake, its dark eyes cautiously observing him from the corner of the room. Its leg was bandaged with strips of an old shirt, and Keanu had done his best to clean the wound, but infection was still a risk. "You're up," Keanu said, his voice low and calm. He crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt you." The dog didn't respond, but its ears twitched slightly at the sound of his voice. Keanu placed a small bowl of water and a plate with a few pieces of cooked chicken on the floor, then stepped back to give the animal space. After a long moment, the dog hobbled forward, its movements cautious, and began to eat. Keanu watched silently, a faint smile tugging at the corner of his lips. "You'll need a name," he muttered. His mind drifted to the bond he'd had with his military service dog, Rex, a loyal companion who had saved his life more than once. That loss still stung, but this dog felt different. "Buddy," he decided. "That's what I'll call you." Buddy quickly adapted to life in the cabin. First, he stayed close to the fireplace, his body tense and alert, but as time passed, he began to trust Keanu, following him around the small cabin and even curling up at the foot of his bed. Keanu found himself talking to Buddy more and more, sharing thoughts he hadn't voiced aloud in years. "I wasn't planning on this, you know," he said one evening, sitting on the porch with a mug of coffee in hand. Buddy lay at his feet, ears perked up as though he were listening. "I came here to disappear, to leave everything behind, and then you showed up." Buddy let out a soft whine, as if in agreement, and Keanu chuckled. "Yeah, I guess life has other plans." One crisp morning, Keanu decided to take Buddy on a hike. The dog's leg had healed surprisingly well, and Buddy seemed eager to explore. Together, they ventured deeper into the woods, following trails Keanu hadn't dared explore alone. Buddy's instincts were sharp. He led Keanu to hidden clearings filled with wildflowers and quiet streams. Keanu felt a renewed sense of wonder as he captured the beauty of the forest through his camera lens. But it wasn't just the landscape that Buddy seemed drawn to. One afternoon, Buddy stopped abruptly, his body tense and his nose twitching. Keanu followed his gaze and spotted something unusual: a metal trap, partially buried in the dirt. Nearby, a tree bore deep scratches, and there were signs of a struggle in the undergrowth. Keanu's jaw tightened as he inspected the scene. The trap was brutal, designed to maim and kill. "Damn it," he muttered under his breath. He had heard rumors of poachers operating in the area but hadn't encountered any evidence. Until now. Buddy growled softly, his eyes scanning the forest as if sensing unseen danger. "You see something?" Keanu asked, following Buddy's gaze. The dog barked once, a sharp, urgent sound, then began to move. Keanu hesitated for only a moment before following. Buddy led him through the woods, weaving between trees with a speed and precision that left Keanu breathless. Finally, they emerged into a clearing. What Keanu saw made his blood run cold. Scattered across the clearing were the remains of several animals: deer, rabbits, and even a fox. Their bodies were mutilated, left to rot in the open. Nearby, a small fire pit still smoldered, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Keanu's hands clenched into fists. This wasn't hunting. This was slaughter. Buddy sniffed the ground, his tail stiff as he moved cautiously around the clearing. He paused near the fire pit, growling low in his throat. Keanu knelt beside him and noticed something half buried in the ashes. A camera. He picked it up carefully, brushing off the soot. It was a small, rugged device, the kind hunters often used to document their kills. If the poachers had left this behind, it might contain valuable evidence. Keanu slipped the camera into his bag and glanced down at Buddy. "Good work, boy," he said quietly. "Let's get out of here." That night, as Keanu reviewed the footage from the camera, his suspicions were confirmed. The videos showed men setting traps, tracking animals, and laughing as they posed with their kills. The faces were clear enough to identify. "This is it," Keanu murmured, his mind racing. He could take the footage to the authorities, but he knew it wouldn't be enough. The poachers operated deep in the wilderness, far from the reach of regular patrols. And if they realized someone was onto them, they might escalate their activities or worse, retaliate. As he sat in the dimly lit cabin, Keanu felt the weight of the decision before him. He had spent years running from responsibility, avoiding the pain of failure. But this was different. The forest, the animals, and now Buddy, they needed him. A low growl from Buddy pulled him from his thoughts. The dog stood at the window, his ears flattened and his body tense. Keanu followed his gaze and froze. In the shadows of the trees, barely visible in the moonlight, were three figures. They were watching the cabin. Keanu Reeves stood frozen, his eyes locked on the shadowy figures lurking just beyond the treeline. The air outside was still, save for the faint rustling of leaves in the breeze. Buddy growled low and steady, his stance protective as he positioned himself between Keanu and the window. Keanu's military instincts kicked in. He quickly extinguished the lantern on the table, plunging the cabin into darkness. "Stay quiet, Buddy," he whispered, his voice barely audible. From his years of experience, Keanu knew better than to confront unknown threats directly, especially when they had the advantage of numbers and the element of surprise. Instead, he moved silently across the room, retrieving a flashlight, a hunting knife, and his old pistol, tools he hoped he wouldn't have to use. Buddy stayed alert, his ears twitching as he tracked every sound outside. Keanu crouched by the window, peering out cautiously. The figures were gone. For a moment, he wondered if his mind had been playing tricks on him. But then Buddy let out another growl, this one sharper, more urgent. Keanu opened the door quietly and stepped onto the porch, his grip firm on the flashlight. The beam cut through the darkness, scanning the edge of the forest. "If you're out there," he called, his voice calm but commanding. "This is private property. You've got no business here." There was no response, just the sound of the wind moving through the trees. Keanu felt the weight of unease settle on his shoulders. Whoever had been watching the cabin wasn't just trespassing, they were testing him. Keanu woke early, his body tense from a restless night. As the first light of dawn filtered through the trees, he ventured outside with Buddy. It didn't take long to find the signs. Deep boot prints circled the cabin, their deliberate placement suggesting the trespassers had taken their time. On the wooden post near the porch, someone had etched a crude X with the tip of a knife, a warning, or perhaps a taunt. Keanu's jaw tightened as he studied the marks. He had no doubt these were the same poachers whose traps and slaughter sites he'd discovered in the woods. The message was clear. They knew he was onto them. Buddy sniffed the ground, his tail stiff as he followed the scent trail leading away from the cabin. Keanu grabbed his gear, his camera, binoculars, and a sturdy walking stick and set off behind the dog. Buddy led Keanu deep into the forest, weaving through dense undergrowth and crossing shallow streams. Hours passed, the two moving in near silence, their senses on high alert. Finally, they stumbled upon a clearing unlike any Keanu had seen before. It wasn't natural. Trees had been cut down to create space for a makeshift camp. From behind the cover of a large boulder, Keanu observed the scene. There were 4 men, heavily armed and dressed in camouflage. They moved with the confidence of people who had done this many times before. The camp was a hive of illegal activity. Crates of equipment were stacked near the center, along with coolers that Keanu could only assume were filled with animal carcasses. A small ATV was parked near the edge of the clearing, its trailer smeared with dried blood. Keanu's stomach churned. He took out his camera and began snapping photos, documenting everything: the faces of the men, the weapons, and the grisly trophies they had collected. Buddy growled softly, his body tense as he crouched beside Keanu. "Easy, boy," Keanu murmured, placing a hand on the dog's back. But even as he said it, he knew they couldn't stay here long. Just as Keanu prepared to retreat, one of the men shouted, "Hey, what's that?" Keanu's heart sank as he realized the flash of his camera had reflected off a metal surface, catching their attention. "Someone's out there," another man yelled, grabbing a rifle. Keanu's instincts took over. "Run, Buddy," he whispered, shoving the dog ahead of him. The forest erupted in chaos as the poachers gave chase. Keanu and Buddy weaved through the trees, the sound of gunfire echoing behind them. Bullets splintered bark and sent birds scattering into the sky. Keanu's training kept him moving swiftly and silently, using the terrain to his advantage. He led Buddy through a narrow ravine, knowing the poachers' bulky equipment would slow them down. But the danger wasn't over. As they climbed a steep incline, Keanu felt the ground shift beneath his feet. A shot rang out, and he instinctively ducked, pulling Buddy down with him. The bullet hit a nearby rock, sending shards flying. Adrenaline surged through Keanu's veins. He spotted a dense thicket ahead and motioned for Buddy to follow. They crawled into the cover of the bushes, their breaths heavy but controlled. The poachers shouted angrily as they searched the area, their voices growing fainter with each passing moment. Keanu stayed perfectly still, his hand resting on Buddy's back as they waited for the danger to pass. When the forest finally fell silent, Keanu let out a shaky breath. He looked down at Buddy, whose dark eyes were filled with both fear and determination. "This isn't just about us anymore," Keanu said quietly. "They're not going to stop until they've taken everything." Buddy let out a soft bark, as if agreeing. Keanu knew he couldn't let the poachers continue their destruction, but he also understood the risks of confronting them directly. He needed a plan and allies. "Come on, boy," he said, rising to his feet. "We've got work to do." With Buddy by his side, Keanu set off toward the nearest town, determined to rally support and protect the forest they called home. Keanu Reeves and Buddy emerged from the forest just as dusk began to settle over the small mountain town of Pine Hollow. The town wasn't much, a few scattered buildings, a diner, a gas station, and a general store, but it was home to a tight-knit community that relied heavily on the surrounding wilderness for its livelihood. Keanu hadn't been into town much since moving to his cabin. He preferred solitude, but now, with the poachers posing a clear and present danger, he knew he couldn't handle this alone. Buddy trotted faithfully at his side as Keanu pushed open the door to the diner. The warm glow of the interior and the smell of fresh coffee greeted him. A handful of locals turned their heads, their conversations halting as they took in the sight of the rugged man and his scruffy canine companion. Behind the counter, a woman in her 40s with a no-nonsense demeanor raised an eyebrow. "Keanu Reeves," she said, her voice tinged with both surprise and curiosity. "Didn't think I'd see you around here again." "Evening, Mary," Keanu replied, his voice steady but serious. "I need your help." Keanu explained what he had seen in the forest, the traps, the mutilated animals, the poachers, and their apparent plan to exploit the wilderness for profit. He showed the photos he had taken, passing his camera around to the group that had gathered. "This is what they're doing out there," Keanu said, his voice grim. "If we don't stop them, they'll destroy everything, every animal, every tree, every stream." The room fell silent as the locals studied the images. Mary frowned, her eyes narrowing. "This is bad," she said. "Real bad. But what do you want us to do? These guys sound dangerous." "They are," Keanu admitted, "but they're not invincible. We know this land better than they do. If we work together, we can stop them." An older man with a thick gray beard spoke up. "And what if they come after us? These types don't play fair." "Son, they've already come after me," Keanu said, his tone unwavering. "I'm not asking anyone to put themselves in harm's way, but if we don't act, they'll only get bolder. This forest isn't just my home. It's ours. It's worth fighting for." Mary nodded slowly, her expression softening. "He's right. If we don't stand up to them now, we'll lose everything." One by one, the locals agreed to help. They weren't fighters, but they knew the forest like the back of their hands. With Keanu's leadership, they could set traps of their own, sabotage the poachers' operation, and gather enough evidence to force the authorities to act. The next day, Keanu led the group into the forest. Mary brought her nephew, Lucas, a tech-savvy teenager who volunteered to set up motion-activated cameras around the poachers' camp. An experienced hunter named Bill carried a bow and quiver of arrows, ready to provide backup if things got dangerous. Keanu laid out the plan. First, they would track the poachers' movements and document their activities. Second, they would disrupt the poachers by disabling their equipment and destroying their traps. Finally, they would coordinate with a nearby wildlife protection agency to conduct a raid. Buddy played a crucial role, using his sharp senses to sniff out hidden traps and lead the group through the dense forest. Keanu was constantly amazed by the dog's intelligence and intuition, which seemed almost otherworldly at times. On the third day of their efforts, the group came dangerously close to being discovered. Keanu, Buddy, and Lucas had ventured near the poachers' camp to plant a hidden camera. As Lucas worked quickly to secure the device to a tree, Buddy suddenly froze, his ears perked and his nose twitching. "Someone's coming," Keanu whispered. Lucas looked panicked, his hands fumbling with the camera. "I'm almost done," he muttered. "Take your time," Keanu said, his voice calm but firm. He scanned the area, his hand resting on the hilt of his hunting knife. Moments later, two poachers emerged from the camp, their voices carrying through the trees. They were arguing, their words laced with frustration. "Damn traps keep going missing." One of them growled, "Someone's messing with us." Keanu motioned for Lucas to stay still. Buddy crouched low, his body tense as he waited for Keanu's command. The poachers came closer, their footsteps crunching on the forest floor. Keanu held his breath, his muscles coiled like a spring. He knew that if they were caught, the poachers wouldn't hesitate to use force. Just as the men were about to pass their hiding spot, Buddy let out a sharp bark. The sound startled the poachers, who turned in the opposite direction, their guns raised. "What the hell was that?" one of them said, moving toward the noise. "Probably just a coyote." The other replied, "Let's check it out." As soon as the poachers were out of sight, Keanu grabbed Lucas's arm. "Move, now." The two of them retreated silently, Buddy leading the way. They didn't stop until they were well outside the poachers' territory. That evening, the group regrouped at Keanu's cabin to review the footage from the hidden camera. What they found was damning: video evidence of the poachers setting traps, skinning animals, and loading their spoils onto an ATV. "This is it," Mary said, her voice filled with determination. "This is what we need to shut them down." Keanu nodded, though his expression remained serious. "This is just the beginning. They're going to realize we're onto them. And when they do, they'll fight back. Hard." "We'll be ready," Bill said, gripping his bow. Keanu glanced down at Buddy, who was curled up by the fireplace. "Yeah," he said quietly, "we will." The forest was eerily quiet. Keanu Reeves stood at the edge of the clearing with Buddy by his side, surveying the poachers' camp from a safe distance. For days, they had been careful, setting traps to disrupt the poachers' work, documenting every illegal activity, and avoiding direct confrontations. But Keanu knew it was only a matter of time before the poachers noticed the resistance. And that time had come. It started with an ambush. Keanu and Mary were scouting a known poaching trail, marking traps for removal, when Buddy suddenly froze, his ears alert. Keanu crouched, scanning the area. He didn't hear anything at first, but then he noticed it, the faint sound of boots crunching on leaves. "Back," Keanu whispered to Mary. Before they could retreat, a voice rang out from the shadows. "You lost, old man." Two poachers stepped into view, rifles slung over their shoulders. Their faces were hard, their eyes cold. Behind them, a third man emerged, carrying a machete. Keanu's grip tightened on his walking stick. "We're just passing through," he said calmly. The lead poacher sneered. "Funny, because you're in the wrong place at the wrong time." He gestured to the traps in Keanu's bag. Looks like you've been messing with our work, Buddy growled. Baring his teeth, Keanu took a step forward, positioning himself between Mary and the poachers. You're trespassing on protected land, he said. What you're doing here is illegal. The poacher laughed. And who's going to stop us? You. Keanu didn't reply. Instead, he held his ground, his body coiled and ready. The tension was palpable, the air thick with the promise of violence. Before the situation could escalate further, a loud snap echoed through the trees. One of the poachers yelped in pain as his foot was caught in a hidden trap, one of their own. Run! Keanu shouted, grabbing Mary's arm. The two bolted through the forest, Buddy close at their heels. Behind them, the poachers shouted curses and fired shots into the air. But Keanu and Mary didn't stop until they reached the safety of the cabin. The poachers weren't ones to let a challenge go unanswered. The following morning, Keanu found the remains of their warning. Outside the cabin, his woodpile had been set on fire, leaving little more than a smoldering heap of ash. On the porch, a crude effigy had been left, a stuffed animal riddled with bullet holes. Mary frowned as she surveyed the damage. They're trying to scare us. Keanu nodded, his jaw tight. It's more than that. They're sending a message. Inside, Lucas was reviewing footage from one of the hidden cameras. They're gearing up, he said, his voice shaking. More men, more equipment. They're bringing in ATVs and chainsaws. It's like they're planning to clear out the entire area. The group fell silent, the weight of the situation sinking in. Keanu broke the silence. We don't have much time. If they're escalating, so are we. Keanu called a meeting that night. Around the table sat Mary, Lucas, Bill, and a handful of others who had joined their cause. Maps of the forest were spread out, marked with known poaching trails and trap locations. This isn't just about stopping them from killing animals, Keanu said, his voice steady. If they're clearing land, they'll destroy the entire ecosystem. We have to act now. The plan was bold and dangerous. They would use the forest itself as a weapon, setting up distractions and traps to turn the terrain against the poachers. Lucas and Mary would monitor the poachers' movements with the motion-activated cameras, providing real-time updates. Bill and a few others would create false trails to lead the poachers away from critical areas. Keanu and Buddy would focus on sabotaging their equipment directly. At dawn, the group moved out. Keanu and Buddy headed straight for the poachers' camp, carrying a backpack filled with tools and supplies. The goal was simple: disable as much equipment as possible before they were discovered. The camp was bustling when they arrived. Men shouted orders as they loaded supplies onto ATVs. Chainsaws roared to life, their blades gleaming in the morning light. Keanu crept through the underbrush, Buddy at his side. He reached the first ATV and carefully cut the fuel line, letting the liquid drain into the dirt. He repeated the process with 2 more vehicles before moving to the chainsaws, removing critical parts and tossing them into the undergrowth. Just as he finished, Buddy growled softly. Keanu turned to see a poacher heading their way, his rifle slung casually over one shoulder. Keanu pressed himself against a tree, holding Buddy close to keep him from barking. The poacher paused, scanning the area. Thought I heard something, he muttered. As the man turned his back, Keanu acted. He slipped forward silently, grabbing a branch and tossing it into the underbrush. The noise drew the poacher's attention in the opposite direction, allowing Keanu and Buddy to slip away undetected. By evening, the group regrouped at the cabin. Their efforts had paid off. The poachers' operations were in chaos. Equipment was broken, traps were missing, and their frustration was evident in the footage captured by Lucas's cameras. But Keanu knew this wasn't over. Desperation made people dangerous, and the poachers were no exception. We've bought ourselves some time, Keanu said, his tone serious. But they're not going to stop. We need to be ready for whatever comes next. Buddy let out a soft bark, his eyes meeting Keanu's. It was as if the dog understood the weight of what was coming. Keanu crouched down, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "You've got my back, right, boy?" Buddy wagged his tail, his loyalty unwavering. As the sun set over the forest, Keanu and his allies prepared for the final battle that was sure to come. The forest stood still, as if holding its breath. Keanu Reeves crouched behind a fallen log, his heart pounding in rhythm with the distant sound of chainsaws. Nearby, Buddy lay low, his ears flat and his body tense. The poachers were making their move, and Keanu knew this was the moment they had been preparing for. From the vantage point atop a ridge, Keanu watched as the poachers advanced deeper into the forest. Their numbers had grown: more men, more ATVs, and a large flatbed truck carrying equipment for clearing trees. The hum of machinery echoed through the trees, a chilling reminder of their destructive intent. "They're not just here to hunt," Keanu muttered, his voice grim. "They're planning to level the place." Over the radio, Mary's voice crackled. "Keanu, they're heading toward the eastern grove, the one with the old oak trees. You've got to stop them before they reach it." The eastern grove was sacred, home to some of the oldest trees in the region and a vital part of the ecosystem. Losing it would be catastrophic. Keanu gripped the radio. "Understood. Stay safe." He glanced at Buddy, who was already on his feet, ready to move. "Let's go, boy." Keanu and Buddy worked quickly, using every tool and resource they had to turn the forest into a battlefield. Lucas and Mary fed them real-time updates on the poachers' movements, while Bill and the others laid false trails to confuse and delay them. The traps were simple but effective. Logs were rigged to roll onto the paths, blocking the ATVs. Ropes tied to saplings created tripwires that sent unsuspecting poachers tumbling. Smoke bombs, crafted from supplies at the cabin, added to the chaos, shrouding the forest in a thick, disorienting haze. Keanu moved like a ghost, striking and retreating before the poachers could react. Buddy was always by his side, sniffing out traps and alerting Keanu to danger. But the poachers weren't easily deterred. Frustration turned to anger, and they began setting fire to sections of the forest in an attempt to flush out their unseen adversaries. As flames licked at the edges of the grove, Keanu knew they were running out of time. He led Buddy toward the flatbed truck, where the poachers had stored their chainsaws and fuel. If they could disable it, the poachers would lose their ability to clear the grove. The truck was guarded by two men, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders. Keanu crept closer, using the dense undergrowth as cover. He signaled to Buddy, who darted around the back of the truck, creating a distraction. "Hey, what was that?" one of the men shouted, turning toward the noise. Keanu seized the moment. He moved swiftly, slashing the tires with his knife and cutting the fuel lines. The sharp scent of gasoline filled the air as the liquid spilled onto the ground. The second guard spotted him. "Hey, you!" Keanu spun around as the man raised his rifle. But before he could fire, Buddy lunged, knocking the gun from his hands. The man stumbled back, shouting in fear as Buddy bared his teeth, a low growl rumbling from his chest. "Good boy," Keanu said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. With the truck disabled, Keanu and Buddy retreated into the forest, leaving the guards shouting in frustration. As night fell, the forest was a battlefield. The poachers, enraged and desperate, pushed deeper into the woods, their flashlights cutting through the darkness. Fires burned in scattered patches, their orange glow illuminating the chaos. Keanu regrouped with Mary, Lucas, and Bill at a hidden clearing. The group was exhausted but determined. "They're tearing the place apart," Bill said, his face grim. "We can't let them reach the grove." Mary added, "It's the heart of this forest. If it falls, everything falls." The poachers made their final push just before dawn. Their leader, a grizzled man with a scar running down his cheek, barked orders as his men advanced. They were met with fierce resistance. Keanu and the others fought with everything they had. Smoke bombs exploded, creating confusion, Logs and rocks were sent crashing down onto the poacher's path. The animals of the forest, sensing the danger, added their own chaos. Deer darted through the underbrush, scattering the intruders, while birds swooped down, startling them. In the midst of the battle, Keanu came face to face with the leader. The man sneered, raising his rifle. "You're in over your head, old man," he said. Keanu didn't respond. Instead, he stepped forward, his eyes cold and unyielding. The fight was brutal and raw, but Keanu's training and determination gave him the upper hand. With a final blow, the poacher was disarmed and forced to retreat. By sunrise, the poachers were gone. The forest was scarred but still standing. The group stood in the clearing, their faces marked with exhaustion and relief. "We did it," Mary said softly. Keanu knelt beside Buddy, who was lying on the ground, his chest rising and falling rapidly. The dog had taken a hit during the fight but was still alive. "You're a fighter, Buddy," Keanu said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're gonna get you patched up. I promise." Buddy wagged his tail weakly, his loyalty unwavering even in pain. Back at the cabin, Keanu tended to Buddy's wounds, his movements gentle and precise. The others worked to contact the authorities, providing the evidence they had gathered to ensure the poachers would face justice. As Keanu sat on the porch that evening, Buddy resting at his feet, he gazed out at the forest. The battle had been won, but the war to protect the wilderness was far from over. "This is our home," he said softly, scratching behind Buddy's ears. "And we're going to keep fighting for it." The forest, though battered, seemed to hum with quiet gratitude. The morning after the battle, the forest seemed to exhale, its quiet stillness returning after the chaos. Keanu Reeves sat on the porch of his cabin, Buddy curled up by his feet. The dog's wounds were healing, but the toll of the fight was evident in the slight limp he now carried. Keanu sipped his coffee, his eyes scanning the treetops. The scars left by the poachers were still visible, the scorched patches of earth, the fallen trees, but there was also life. Birds chirped in the distance, and a deer cautiously stepped into the clearing, as if sensing that the danger had passed. Later that day, Mary arrived at the cabin, her arms full of supplies. "How's the hero?" she asked, nodding toward Buddy. Keanu smiled faintly. "He's tougher than he looks, aren't you, boy?" Buddy wagged his tail, his eyes bright despite his injuries. Mary set the supplies down and took a seat beside Keanu. "The authorities are on their way," she said. Lucas turned in all the footage. "They've got more than enough evidence to put those bastards away for good." "That's a start," Keanu replied, "but it won't stop others from trying." Mary nodded, her expression thoughtful. "You're right. That's why we've been talking, me, Bill, Lucas, and the others. We think it's time to do more than just defend this place. It's time to protect it properly." Keanu raised an eyebrow. "What are you thinking?" "A wildlife sanctuary," Mary said. "We turn this land into a protected area, with legal backing and community support. No one will be able to touch it." Keanu leaned back, considering her words. A sanctuary would ensure the forest's survival, but it would also mean stepping out of the shadows and committing to a fight that went beyond just this one battle. That night, Keanu sat by the fire, Buddy resting beside him. The weight of Mary's proposal lingered in his mind. For years, he had sought solitude, running from the ghosts of his past. But now, he couldn't ignore the connection he felt to the forest and to the people and animals that called it home. He looked down at Buddy, whose steady presence had become a source of strength. "What do you think, boy? You ready for the next fight?" Buddy lifted his head, his tail thumping softly against the floor. Keanu smiled. "Yeah, me too." In the weeks that followed, the people of Pine Hollow came together like never before. Keanu and Mary worked tirelessly, meeting with local officials, conservationists, and wildlife experts to lay the groundwork for the sanctuary. Lucas used his tech skills to create a website and social media pages, spreading the word about their efforts. Donations began to pour in, not just from the town, but from people across the state who had heard about the battle to save the forest. Keanu found himself stepping into a role he never expected, leading tours of the forest, speaking to groups about the importance of conservation, and sharing the story of Buddy's bravery. "You're becoming a local celebrity," Mary teased one afternoon as they walked through the forest. Keanu shook his head. "It's not about me. It's about this place, and about making sure no one forgets what we almost lost." Buddy became a star in his own right. Visitors to the forest often asked to meet the hero dog. And Buddy, ever the loyal companion, greeted them with a wagging tail and a patient demeanor. Children especially adored him, and Keanu often found himself surrounded by curious kids, eager to hear about Buddy's adventures. He used these moments to teach them about respecting nature and the importance of standing up for what's right. One crisp autumn morning, Keanu and Buddy ventured deep into the forest, following a trail they hadn't explored before. The air was cool and filled with the scent of pine and fallen leaves. As they walked, Keanu noticed something unusual, a faint glow emanating from a grove of ancient trees. He approached cautiously, Buddy at his side. In the center of the grove stood an old stone, weathered by time but still bearing faint carvings. Keanu knelt to examine it, running his fingers over the intricate patterns. "It's like this place has been protected for centuries," he murmured. Buddy barked softly, his tail wagging. Keanu smiled, feeling a deep sense of connection to the land and its history. "This is why we fight," he said, his voice quiet but resolute. Months later, the Pine Hollow Wildlife Sanctuary was officially established. The land was declared a protected area, ensuring that future generations could enjoy its beauty and wildlife. Keanu stood at the dedication ceremony, Buddy by his side, as Mary gave a heartfelt speech about the community's efforts and the importance of preserving nature. When it was Keanu's turn to speak, he stepped forward, his gaze sweeping over the crowd. "This forest isn't just a place," he said. "It's a reminder of what we're capable of when we stand together. It's proof that even in the face of destruction, we can choose to protect and preserve what matters most." The audience erupted into applause, and Keanu glanced down at Buddy, who wagged his tail proudly, as the sun set over the sanctuary, casting golden light across the trees. Keanu and Buddy walked along a familiar trail. The forest was alive with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, a stark contrast to the silence that had once threatened to consume it. Keanu paused, taking a deep breath of the cool, clean air. "We did good, Buddy," he said, patting the dog's head. "But the fight's not over. Not yet." Buddy barked in agreement, his eyes shining with determination. Together, they disappeared into the forest, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead.